Hello and welcome to the Pinkbike Podcast, vodcast. If you want the full experience, you could be watching this on YouTube and just drinking it all in on all the senses.
We have a smell-o-vision coming soon.
Yeah, totally. So we're in Whistler, rounding out the 2024 field test, and this is the sort of unabridged version, the Roundtable, where we kind of are going to rank these bikes on the likelihood that we would recommend them. Importantly, recommend them to someone that we like, that we want to see happy and enjoying their mountain biking. Kaz, it's been a big week. We've spoken about it in kind of various conversations. It's been an interesting mix of bikes. There have been some real outliers by brands that people might not have heard of, so like Spot. But then on the other side, we've got some real bread and butter bikes, your Specialized and your Santa Cruzes coming up trumps in that regard. How's this field test been for you?
Been interesting, yeah. Like we mentioned earlier, that a lot of these bikes seem similar on paper, and then getting to ride them, they're a lot more different than I thought. Kind of interesting to see, even just they're 140 bikes, 150 bikes, but there's a huge range of how they actually feel on the trail. So it's been good. I was a little worried it might be kind of boring, like that the bikes would just feel, oh, they're all fine, and then there's not much to talk about, but I don't think that's the case.
Every time I think AI is going to come for my job, I ride the bikes and I'm like, God, there's no way.
I couldn't do this.
Matt, we've had some of these bikes on this test, and we'll get into it in due course, that for whatever reason haven't quite felt like they've lined up exactly with what the geometry chart would suggest.
Yeah.
What do you put that down to? And how come some bikes feel more like the geometry chart than others?
I mean, we've definitely had some aluminum bikes in the past where it's been questionable whether the geometry matched the chart and what they, laid out for. But then also, I think some of the components like handlebars have different sweeps, and the stem and everything combined together can maybe put the rider in a different position that might be the same geometry on the frame as another one, but all those components add up to be something totally different.
Absolutely.
Worth noting, we measured some of the bikes that felt funky, and none were like drastically off measure-wise. Like head angles were the same as advertised, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I think we always talk about there's not one sort of golden dimension to bike design. But to that, I would counter that there's also no excuse to put weird handlebars on a bike in 2024, to my mind. Like,
yeah. And then there's also the, like static geometry versus the dynamic one, which kind of varies on how you set up the shocks and where the handlebars lie on the bike as well. So
I feel like that plays the biggest role here.
Yeah.
Some like very, very similar on paper bikes ride fundamentally differently because of just where you're sitting in the chassis.
Dario, before we actually get into ranking these bikes, how much would you value your haircut?
What I paid you, 45 Canadian, right?
I think I did a damn fine job.
I think it's good. I like to think that I get maybe like a 5% discount for every one of these speed lines you put in the side. But beyond that, it's a valuable haircut.
I think it looks.
I think that the back feels very long.
I mean,
I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but
your hair
getting a little mullety, perhaps.
Your hair grows asymmetrically. That being said, I am sorry about cutting your ear.
Did you actually cut my ear?
Yeah, I wasn't joking. There's blood.
Oh, I had no idea.
It was hard because a combination of these big clippers I got from Walmart and my sausage fingers, I couldn't get your ear out the way. But anyway, that's not the point.
Well, I thought you were joking. I didn't realize you actually cut it.
There was a little bit of blood, but that's okay. So your haircut looks very nice. Now, we're going to start ranking these bikes. Kaz, can you tell me the bike you are least likely to recommend to someone that you like?
Yes, that bike that I'd be least likely to recommend to someone I like would be the Ibis Ripmo.
Ooh, interesting. So, in a sentence or two, can you explain why that would be? Before I want to kind of pepper it with everyone's, and then we'll kind of discuss more broadly.
I think it didn't shine in any one area. Like there wasn't one standout characteristic, and I think all of the other bikes, there was something I could pull out of that I could make it worth recommending.
Mm-hmm. Very fair. Matt, what is your least likely?
I think I might also be in the same boat here.
That's right. Dario, do you know what your last place is?
Same as Mike.
The Ibis.
Ripmo. Yeah.
Me too.
I felt bad about that. I spent a bunch of time with that bike trying to make it feel more normal to me, and it never did.
I mean, take your win where you can, lads. Sometimes we don't provide that much editorial clarity, but for once the stars have aligned. We've all got the position. The
yours
bike
is the
in
same?
position, yeah.
Unanimous. I don't know if that's a good unanimous from their end, but from our end, we all agreed, so.
I mean, yeah, but it's,
So it's funny too. You look at it like this year, unanimously, maybe our least favorite bike. Last year, a kind of similar seeming bike was close to the top of all of our lists.
I think you nominated it for Bike of the Year. Hey,
it made the list. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a good,
Really great
it's
bike.
a good bike. It's fun.
Yeah, I think it was my like third or fourth last year.
Yeah.
well,
Pretty strong.
let's talk through it then, Dario. To make it your least likely to recommend, what is the main reason behind that?
It felt like it was not living up to full potential. I
Mhm.
think that's what it came down to. I from riding past Ripmos relative to the field and from what this bike could be, I do think it just didn't perform on that. I think the suspension feel was okay and like good in some scenarios, but not well-rounded enough to earn much value beyond it being novel feeling relative to the rest of this field. And then I think the components held it back. Like, it had codes with the smallest rotors possible. It had a weird fork that really just didn't handle very well. I think there were just weak points that I couldn't overlook.
Matt, what would your be? Where would you land?
I mean, it was number 8, like we said, but yeah, I was just kind of confused about what this bike was targeted towards, like, or what rider this was targeted towards, with it having a 160 mil fork, a 150 mil rear travel, and then also the, you can switch it to like be a mullet, but it's not aggressive, and it just seemed confused. Like, for that much travel, I expected it to descend better, and it didn't.
So
yeah, if you told me it was like 130 and had a 140 fork, I'd believe you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just like,
yeah, I just felt very timid on the bike the whole time. And then even the uphill, it did like pedal and kind of track well, but it was just never felt settled.
But it's weird. I'd say, sometimes it's, to put this, I mean, you said a great word there for potential, Dario, and you can look at a bike and you can say how potentially good it could be. But I would say between the four of us, we've ridden a lot of bikes, we've set up a lot of bikes, and it never really felt like any of us came back saying, oh my God, I cracked it. When other times
like I had with other bikes.
You've had with other bikes.
And this one, I just never had that moment.
And a lot of the setup of these bikes through these sort of quite intense testing periods, we come back and we sort of, oh, I did this on this, and it enabled it. And none of us had that eureka moment. I found it so hard to set up, and I'd never actually feel like I even got a handle on it.
Yeah.
To be honest.
And there's even like the guide to go off that they provide. But we were like, if we went by their recommendations, I think maybe excluding you, Henry, like the three of us would have been even more exposed when we were going downhill, right? So like we were running the fork way above recommended, and still felt very timid, and it felt like a small bike to me.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up going the opposite way, just trying to get some more front end grip, going for a lot softer on the fork, and trying to do a bit of work in the sort of compression side of things. But I mean, I can't say that it was a worthwhile endeavor, because I ended up still just as, I remember when we did that shootout.
Yeah.
Jesus H Christ.
You were shook.
I was absolutely, like, the front didn't track, the rear didn't track, the relationship between the two.
Yeah.
Apart from the refusal.
And it's not like
to
it was
do
the
what I
only
want.
bike that suffered in that, but you could see the ones that did.
Well, maybe that's a really good way to lead up to our next bike, number 7, because I've got a feeling it was another bike that struggled potentially in that shootout, or at least for me. Kaz, what was your sort of your 7th bike?
My 7th is the Rocky Mountain Instinct.
Okay, why?
This is another bike that didn't quite live up to its potential as far as feeling. I never felt like it was very active when I didn't want it to be active. It's kind of, it's got the light trail bike characteristics, but then it kind of reaches its limits very, very early.
I would say similar to the Ibis, the shock was underdamped.
Yeah.
Maybe even more extremely.
Maybe. I mean, I think how can we just, we get to ride all these different bikes, and we've spoken about it in the reviews, spoken about it in so many different ways. But sometimes we talk so much about how, oh my God, this bike's so sensitive. It's smooth off the top, the small bump sensitivity. And then bikes like this come along and they give us very sensitive, and we say, guys, you got it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of what our jobs are. We're going to find you can go too far in either direction. I think they just went too far with the light compression tune on this shock. And so it just feels like the rear wheel is moving a lot. There's only 140 millimeters of travel to work with. And then you kind of still reach the end of the travel quickly, but then there's a lot of ramp up no matter which position you set it in. So you kind of it just feels like it's moving a lot more than you want it to, where we'll talk about the Canyon Spectral eventually, where that's same travel bracket, but that one felt like it would just kind of maintain its composure, stays calm, where this bike is just kind of wants to dance around, not when you want it to dance around, basically.
But fundamentally, it feels like it has good geometry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very adjustable too. So that's where like the Ripmo, there's not much you can do except put a different size rear wheel on it, but you can't tweak the geometry anymore to maybe try to unlock something. I think with the Ripmo, my issue is more the fork. I really had trouble with the Grip X damper on that bike. I think if I had to, someone told me the Ripmo's your bike, you need to fix it, I would put a different fork on it or just a different damper, and then maybe a coil shock.
Yeah.
Ripmo
I like to think you could fix that bike.
Yeah, I think there's
with
potential.
Component changes, but they'd be sweeping. Like it'd be a very different bike.
I think it'd be easier to fix the Rocky than
that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I think with the Rocky, it'd be easier. I think a different rear shock, and you could probably be sweet. Like it was a little bit rattly at times. That was my other gripe about it. But as far as the, yeah, so it's noisy and the rear shock doesn't feel great. But besides that, like the geometry, I could find a comfortable spot. It's cool that you've got the adjustable chainstay position.
Yeah. The ride forward chip, the reach adjust is awesome.
Yeah, it looks
that's
good.
A really cool feature.
Yeah. So it's almost there, but just isn't. We'll talk about the ones that are above it later.
So, I mean, we were joking that I don't really hear bikes. For whatever reason, I just don't hear bikes.
Yeah.
But I could hear the Rocky.
It's loud.
You know, there's a lot going on. Matt, what's the 7th bike on your list?
The 7th was also the Rocky Instinct for me.
Oh my God,
We're just like telepathic.
Yeah.
And for the record, we haven't talked about these at all before. This is completely fresh.
Yeah.
Dario, what's
Rocky
your 7th?
Instinct.
Mine's the...
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Matt, talk us through it.
Well, I mean, you guys alluded to the underdamped shock. I don't know if that's totally the case. If we had more time, we could try different shocks, and that's not our job. We're just here to review that bike as it is. But I think there's an underlying issue, and it's more like a fundamental problem with the leverage on that bike, and
it's way too high.
The best I can compare it to, or give you an analogy, is if you're standing on a trampoline, standing still, and you want to go jump off it, you have to push through so much to get to this level of support before you can go anywhere.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
And so it's just a bit also a bit confused and kind of wallowy. And if you're just riding at low speed, it does give you a lot of traction. But when you hit things at higher speeds, the rear end of the bike is just plummeting through the suspension, and then it hits this ramp. So it can just feel confused, and I never knew where I was in the travel of this bike. So some small bumps feel harsh, some small bumps work well and are absorbed, and it's just it feels kind of clacky and confused.
It's funny. I think I've got pretty good base settings on the 36 and the Lyric for that matter. However, the not bottom out, and that's the important thing, but the ramp was so firm on the Rocky, I was bottoming out the fork.
It would slap you down.
Yeah, it would the stapler effect.
Travel.
Just
yeah.
And I just wanted to use more travel on the rear. It would be a hit on the rear, and it would just send so much your mass forward as it hang up. Derry, you experimented with this bike. In fact, we all did. The settings.
I went through everything in pursuit of making it as linear as possible. So the Ride 4 settings do slightly change the kinematic of the bike. Primarily just the starting ratio and the steepest setting. So steepest head angle, highest BB, longest reach, I think is how that all shakes out, is also the most linear setup. And then reducing the chainstay length with the flip chip that they have also reduces leverage on the shock. So going into the shortest position and the most aggressive, traditional, if you will, geo was where I found it worked best. I didn't really care about all the geometry things because the bike felt a bit more stable.
And why was that?
I think because it has a lower starting leverage.
It's reducing the size
relative
of the lever
to
over the shock.
I think the biggest change is that chainstay length. It wasn't it's great now. It was just better, and in pursuit of better, I was pretty happy with that. But to me, it's you kind of, in that sense, then negate all the adjustments that you could make to that bike by requiring that someone who wants support out of it go into the most extreme mode. So.
Yes, I think that's such a good point. I mean, I went sort of down a similar avenue, but executed it slightly differently. In that I was actually in the linear mode, and then I started riding it. It sounds like a hack, but with the Pro pedal the climb switch on.
And I did a lap like you had your setup, and it felt
better than it was.
Harsh, but it was more supportive.
But that's why I went to the more progressive mode to try and overcome
take off the top,
the pro pedal.
Yeah.
And honestly, I felt safer, and that's from where it was on that shootout. I mean, I just wanted to feel safe.
And it's too bad because like the rest of the bike fundamentally is great. Like tons of adjustment,
full frame,
different fits in terms of sizing, and well laid out, like easy to reach bottle. Has the storage compartment, and it's pretty clean looking too.
And I think lightest frame on test.
Right.
Yeah. I think with a well damped shock, it would be. I think you can make it really good. But I would say that, like, sort of reshimming shocks can be kind of going into a bit of the unknown. But you could just say to a suspension tuner, just go like 4 or 5 notches up with the compression tune, and you'd probably still be all right.
Yeah, I think like jumping a couple compression tunes harder would be a safe bet. That's why it's kind of outside the purview of this test, but I reviewed the Altitude, their enduro bike, earlier this year, and had a similar complaint with that, where I found the shock tune too light. I was able to get my hands on a heavier damped shock and found that it worked better for my purposes. Contacted Rocky about that, and they just recommended that whenever I did, if I were a customer, if I got that bike serviced, to just ask that suspension house to then change the shim stack. So perhaps that's the recommendation here, but again,
but if you're buying a bike, like all this, we're getting so deep in the weeds in a bike.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to buy a bike and then have
like
to reshim the shock.
Exactly. Like they need to fix the shock tune on this bike, and they could really make it better. I think that's
Okay, cool. But it's like we alluded to in the review, but it could be one for the fettlers.
Yeah.
It is the most adjustable bike on test.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I feel like we try and oftentimes spare each other the real, we don't try and fill in each other's gaps. But it felt like through this whole test, those were the 2 bikes that people were struggling with the most.
Yeah.
That'd be fair to say. Let's get on to number 6, which things are going to start getting interesting now, because it's, for me, there's the top 3 and the middling 3. Number 7.
6.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't count. Number, what's after 7? 6.
There we go. Counting backwards is trickier.
What was yours, guys?
Mine was the Transition Sentinel.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Why?
Yeah, it was. Well, what about it? Huh?
What about it?
I mean, there wasn't anything about the bike that I necessarily overly disliked, but it also didn't wow me. It just kind of felt familiar, but also nothing was like, ooh, that's new and exciting, and I want to just keep riding it and like really like unlock it. I felt it's a fairly neutral bike, at least for me. Kind of longer. I liked the old Sentinel because it almost we talked about trail and all mountain. It kind of had that all mountain feel, where this one feels like they stretched out just a little bit, at least the chainstay length. So almost for me at times it felt a little bit like harder to get off the ground, not quite as lively.
Interesting, because Kaz, this could finally be the time. Every time I do a review, right,
You want the stays longer?
I always complain about, and not because like not on all bikes, but oftentimes I'm like, come on, like you've got a 650 stack, a 63-degree head angle, just make the bloody stays longer, get some more weight on the front. Kaz, this was a bit rich for me, Vicar.
Yeah.
This was sometimes the weight on the front. I was like, wow, I'm not complaining anymore. And they put a 40mm rise bar as stock on a trail bike, I think just to try and get some bloody weight off the thing. Yeah.
So it just kind of ends up feels like it's like almost closer to an enduro bike, but it doesn't really have the suspension feel from an enduro bike. So that's where it's kind of like it doesn't feel confused, but for me, it just didn't really like scratch that aggressive trail bike itch.
So basically, this is like, for me, I had such a strong affinity with the Spire. I thought I was going to like the Sentinel. Ultimately, a lot more than I did. It's not actually my 6th place bike. We'll get to mine in a moment. Matt, what was your number 6?
Number 6 was the Spot Mayhem for me.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I do like this bike, and I do think it's a great trail bike for a lot of people. It's just a bit of an unknown. Like the brand has sort of had their ups and downs, and it's just hard to point somebody towards that bike with the cost and those unknowns when there are so many other great bikes out there.
Well, I mean, I don't know. How should we approach this? Do you want to go dive into the Mayhem, or should we stick to the Transition? Because The Mayhem was also my 6th.
Well, and the Transition was also my 6th.
Okay, right. Well, what
so
we'll
we're
do,
50-50.
Yeah.
what we'll do is we're going to have a little tickle on the Transition.
Okay.
And then we're going to come back to
I
Mayhem.
share thoughts with Mike on, and you, it sounds like, on the rear center being a bit long for the bike. It felt like it would pitch you forward unless you had a very firm fork setup. And if you had a very firm fork setup, it kind of made you feel a bit weirdly rearward on the bike. And that bike to me felt best with pretty high sag number.
Yes.
Like that's where it rode nicest. I think the BB height is a bit higher than some of the others.
And
on
to be
test.
fair, they do recommend fairly high.
They do, yeah.
so
And
it's
I was in line with their sag recommendations, but on the highest end of those.
Which could you just explain that's above 30% for a relatively middle travel bike?
Yeah, which is not unheard of, but unusual.
Yeah.
And I was at 33%. So, pretty high sag number.
This bike, to me, I ran it with less sag, so a higher spring rate. And I found it really better, but because it's a relatively progressive linkage with hydraulic bottom out, and then it came, with a good amount of volume reduction in the shock, I found it really hard to get full travel. So then I went softer, more sag, such as you were saying, and then I would just hit all of that, that trifecta of support, and I couldn't really have both. I preferred the feeling that I was bottoming out a lot because it was actually controlled. It wasn't like smashing into the end stroke, but at the same time I was like riding like relatively sort of chill, fun blue runs and being like, well, that used all of my travel.
It does go through the first part pretty quick.
Yeah.
I used a lot of travel on a lot of different trails, but found that okay. Like it worked well for me in that sense. And I wouldn't sacrifice the suspension setup I had because it made the body position on the bike exactly as I wanted it relative to how it felt when I was running less sag.
Kaz, can you just explain that on one hand, the Rocky, depends where you read it, but let's say it's got a 648 rear, sorry, not a 648, a 448 rear end and a 650 stack. And then we say the Transition, it's got a 448 rear long. It's too long. How can we live with this? How does it play into the bigger picture of the bike?
I don't know. That my brain is
I
short.
think dynamic ride height plays
But
a
also
role
the
there.
Rocky's a bit taller at the front, right?
Yep.
I think it is. I think it's like 640 stack.
Yeah, I think
645.
it depends.
Then you
a
have the
bit.
40 mil rise bars. I think
bar
they're,
height changes.
but the bar.
I don't know.
I mean, I think they
It's
both.
one of
I didn't
those-
like the Instinct as much in the long chainstay setting either, though.
Me
So,
either. Very
like,
fair.
I am a fan of longer chainstays in many cases. But I think for some of these bikes, they just you were talking about trail bikes. You kind of want that snappiness, that little like quick cornering thing. So when it kind of starts diminishing that, then it doesn't.
I think
feel like
part of
that
it
as
too
much.
is the fact that like there were bigger fish to fry with the Instinct, and you're more aware of those than you are like geometry minutia.
Yeah,
Where
but
with
I had like
the-
I mean I also rode the Instinct a bunch before this test. Spoiler alert! But I ended up preferring it in the shorter chainstay setting there, just because that kind of like helps unlock. It feels more like a trail bike rather than trying to be something else. Where the back to the Sentinel, that just felt a little bit more like I said, it's kind of like the enduro bike, all mountain bike. It didn't quite feel like it knew what it was, but I think people will be happy with it. If there's nothing wrong with it. Just for me, it didn't quite just didn't
Wasn't
have that
as
spark I was
exciting.
looking for. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's still like it's a good bike. You can get down plenty of technical trails, and it's not like a bad bike by any means. But just for me, I was just a little bit underwhelmed. I'd say.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I did just check. Yeah. The stack is slightly higher on the Rocky, but you're right. It isn't crazy. It just the Rocky felt like a far better balanced bike to me, front to rear.
I didn't notice that
Yeah.
as much when I was riding it. But yeah, just the Sentinel. I guess we'll kind of like move on from my Sentinel thoughts. But I just kind of felt like it was like it's all right. But it just wasn't like that's wasn't the one I wanted to keep grabbing.
Yeah. Very, very fair. The Transition was an interesting bike. We spoke about it a lot in the reviews, so please do check them out. But you can overstroke it to 65 mil. I'd be really curious to see what sort of running it at the same sag, but then just a bit more room for it to go. I'd be really curious where that would take.
I'd be curious mixed wheel too. If you put a smaller rear wheel on that, maybe that could do it a little bit.
Yeah. Because I mean, I like the approach of keeping the chainstay length between 29 and mixed wheel the same, and just using that smaller wheel to change the weight bias on the bike. I think maybe that would be cool.
So let's talk about the spot and how we're getting to the position where we're recommending a bike that can't be ridden in mud or dirt of any meaningful quantity.
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
because there's such you couldn't fit a piece of card between
like a small thin piece of cardboard does not fit between the tire and the stays. And to be fair, like you could run like a 2.3,
and that's better than the Transition.
Yeah, it was a fun bike.
Yeah, it's so fun. It's one of those things that it looks like on paper the geometry looks a little funny and the actual looks of the bike are a bit polarizing, but then the way it rides, it's so fun. I really like that bike. It's higher up on my list, but I'm more willing to overlook some of its quirks and the fact that in mud it's going to have some issues because it's so fun.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the geometry sort of belying performance, and maybe the Ibis is a good example of it in a negative way. But in terms of a bike outperforming its geometry chart.
Yeah, it's so fun.
It can go.
Yeah. And speaking of mud, it's kind of funny that a few years ago, the Score 4060, the kind of initial Score, when that bike came through, it had some mud. It just held a lot of mud inside the frame, but that bike we liked a lot too. So I don't know if there's a relationship between a bike's ability to deal with mud versus how fun it is, but the spot is...
It's a good job it never rains here, huh?
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect. I mean, to be fair, they are based in Colorado, so they don't have to deal with a lot of mud. So if you're in Colorado, I mean,
because Ibis are from Colorado as well.
You would think, but they're not.
Ibis are from Colorado.
Yeah.
Henry's starting the deep rumor that Ibis is actually a Colorado brand.
They are. I don't care. I feel like you're just gaslighting me.
You
they
go visit them.
Absolutely from Colorado.
No, they're not.
It says it on the seat stay of the bike.
Well, of course they're going to say it on the seat
California.
stay to throw you off the scent.
Yeah.
They're not going to say the thing they're trying to... Yeah. Absolutely. But anyway.
The Spot is Colorado, and it does come with a Maxxis Dissector rear tire, which is a fairly narrow tire, so you wouldn't have as many problems. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also the kind of thing like, you know, we're riding these bikes in the real world. If you were on a ride with a bike like this, you could go on a pretty long ride. It's very efficient. You break a spoke, your wheel is even a little bit out of true. Yeah. It might render your bike unrideable. I think that's like something to consider.
To me seems like a bad thing.
It is.
It is.
But it's not worse than a sensible transition.
This thing's so fun. I mean, we're talking about bikes. These bikes are silly.
We're
just talking about toys.
So much better than that bike that it was worth that concession.
Yeah, this is a more fun toy than the other fun toys we're talking about.
Yep.
And the suspension feels amazing. That little leaf spring.
Yeah.
It does a lot.
It's really great.
I keep equating it to a Yeti, and I think
it
has that like je ne sais quoi of like it's doing a thing that you don't totally intuit, but something's happening through the stroke. You're like, ooh, that was nice. Like it has a very cool characteristic to it. It handles its travel really nicely. So I think that's why it was a bit higher on my list.
Wow, I'm glad. I mean, I think it's a novel bike. I think it's really cool. I actually really enjoyed riding it, but I couldn't recommend to a friend. I couldn't.
I did the other day, actually. He lives in Colorado, though.
Oh,
so I was like,
I heard his bike on the phone.
Yeah, because it's a really fun bike. But yeah, next generation of that, hopefully they can add some tire clearance.
So, do you think? Sorry, Mike.
Was that your only quirk then? Like, what is that? What you're holding back on?
I love the bike.
Yeah.
I couldn't. If we're talking about like an Achilles heel, not the wheel, not being able to spin. Achilles heel. The wheel not being able to spin in dirt without scuffing up the frame seemed...
They did put a big rubber bumper in there, to be fair.
Which takes away even more time.
It does. It takes away more clearance, but it means when the bike picks up a rock and shoves it through the frame, it doesn't make that like a heinous carbon scouring sound. It's just like a quiet thud.
So is this, sometimes you send tight tire clearance for, maybe whatever reason.
I think the
but
term is tucked.
Is this about just shortening the rear end as much as possible?
Or stiffening
the stays aren't like insanely short on this. I think it's more just, like there's a lot of material there. They maybe didn't consider that until later in the design brief, or were like really fixated on the
pivot location.
Yeah, I think that could be part of it, because there's some funny concessions made with like the water bottle mount and stuff for that leaf spring to fit.
The floating water bottle.
I think that's
a structural member of the suspension. There it is.
They did fit a bottle, but there are. I mean, that's the thing. This bike has compromises, and I think
has compromises.
It does, but it's nice. It's
Everything
so fun to
does,
ride. Yeah.
Okay, you can enjoy your Schwalbe Marathon tire on this bike.
I will.
Your Thunderbird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why. Yeah, for me, that's why I recommended the Sentinel over this one. Was just not so much the ride quality of both, but just like ease of ownership and like serviceability and just being normal.
Okay, so the Mayhem was mine and Matt's 6th. The Transition was Kaz and Dario's. Let's get to number 5. Kaz, what was your 5th place bike? I think I'm going to piss everyone off here. I know I'm going to piss. I'm going to cover on my screen.
My 5th place bike was the Vinci Troy.
Ooh, okay. Things are going to get messy quick.
Yeah.
Love it.
Number 5 for me was the Sentinel.
Okay. And Dario?
Mayhem.
Okay, so we've spoken. Oh man, you guys are going to fucking hate this.
What'd you put there?
The Bronson.
No. Bronson's 5th?
Yeah.
That's fair.
Because it's a
not
really
fair.
good
I
bike.
disagree.
It's just not good at what I want a trail bike to do.
Oh,
It's
but
like,
I
do
don't
you know
wanna-
what's a great cut of meat? A chocolate gatto. What? It's not what it is. It's delicious, but it's not what it is.
Is that candy? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's a European cake.
Or like maybe like a vanilla slice.
Dario, yours is the Mayhem, number 6.
Mine
right?
was the Mayhem for all the reasons that we've discussed. I think we can lay Mayhem to rest in that sense.
I think we've covered the Sentinel as well.
But then we'll get back to it because Mike's is higher on the list.
Yeah. So, well, should we dig into the Bronson?
Sure.
I mean, the Bronson is a really good bike. It's like a mini V10.
Yeah.
I enjoyed riding it. I thought it was great, but it wasn't good at the thing that I wanted it to be good at, which is trail biking. It was good at enduro. Do you know what I mean?
Why not?
Well, yeah, why it was bad?
Because there's so much bike in front of you. The front's so high.
We can
The
just
weight
lower
by
the
some-
bars.
Yeah, you can, but you can say that for any of these bikes.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
in its basically in its foundation of what it is a really aggressive trail bike that's going to be. It's too biased towards descending for like a nice all-round. If you compared it to something like the Spectral, or
But it has the
It's
same
just
head
a-
angle as a Spectral.
yeah, but they ride very different.
Well, yeah, they
They
less
do.
travel.
It's the height on the front as much as anything. It doesn't make it feel so.
I
alive
didn't
on
feel
the
like it
flat
was
stuff.
tall.
Did you not?
No, like, I mean, it didn't feel like we climbed some techie stuff and I was like, Mr.
I
doing
lowered
this.
it from where they had it set up stock, but like still had more spacers available.
I tell you what, fundamentally, and this is going to sound. I just thought it was boring.
Really?
I just thought it was quite like, yeah.
I mean,
I
a
love
little,
that bike.
but like
Yeah, I know.
it worked well. You know,
I don't think it's boring. It's good. It's a good bike. The Bronson's
It's
good.
good.
Don't listen
Yeah.
to Henrik.
we'll get to it later. I mean, it's going to be higher. I bet it. I think I can guess where it is on some lists, but
Okay, well, fair. I mean, for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
I
It
just
did everything I'd want in a trail bike. It's not for everybody because I do agree that it is on that more enduro side of things or aggressive. But like for me, if you could only have one bike, I would bias my trail bike to be more towards the descending.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, so that's where the difference comes
Yeah,
in.
but I just think that it is a really good bike. But the thing that it will just make trail riding to me a bit.
What if you just go bigger, hit bigger, Huck and Henry,
Oh,
hit
yeah,
the bigger
and then
jump
we get,
space.
yeah, but then if this was like,
but I think we have to be careful about how much we say the word trail because I think like whatever.
All mountain.
Well, yeah, but it's just like it's such a vague identifier anyway. Like, you know, Mike's trail riding is maybe different than yours, and like, or like what your goal is with it. You know, within this travel bracket, the Bronson does an impressive job with the travel it has.
Mm-hmm.
I had some like frustrations with that bike, but they're not bringing it that far down in my list.
yeah, which is fair. I mean, like it's not even necessarily. If I was recommending a trail bike to my friend, that's all. Like if somebody wanted an enduro bike,
Yeah.
they're like, I want something like a bit lively. I'd be like, well, this is a good candidate.
For the Sea to Sky, it would be a really good one bike.
I was going to say, put it this way. Like if you're a downhiller, you have a downhill bike and you have an XC bike and one day those disappear, you're going to pick this bike. You're not going to pick a Nomad. You're going to get something that pedals a little bit better, is a little bit more active.
I might still pick a Nomad.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I don't need, like a lot of times I don't need the big fork of a Nomad. I mean, weight wise, we can't really talk because this bike's not super light, but I think you don't always need the big extra burly everything. So for me, I kind of like the 36 bike.
I think you're right. But I think if I'm going that far, I'm going to go, a little 10 meters further and just get an enduro bike.
They did make, like from the past generation to this one, they did make it a lot closer to what the Nomad feels like on the trail.
Yeah, which is a bit confused to me, but I think that's fine. Like we don't need to get into like each brand's lineup.
Yeah, I didn't think it did anything bad in the climbs, so that's why I would. If it was worse in the climbs, like I didn't feel like they made concessions in the climbs that made it like, oh, this is too much. Like
it climbs super well.
climbs great. So then for me, that's why I like it.
Okay, well, so we need to cover the Troy in depth. I want to hear more thoughts on the Bronson.
Yeah.
But let's go to number 4 bike. We'll see if it kind of comes out in the wash. My number 4 for the record was the Transition.
Mine's the Spot Mayhem.
Yes, Kaz. Yes, Kaz. I love it.
Yeah.
Because you refuse to ride in the rain, right? That's something famous about you.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Kaz has got his perfect pump track bike,
Yeah.
which is great. Sure, I'll be actually supported this field test. They will hook you up with some slick tires for your commuter bike. Dario, what was your number 4?
Mine was the Vinci Troy.
Okay. And Matt?
Also the same.
The Troy?
Number 4, Troy.
Okay, so we've got some bloodletting to do eventually on the Bronson. We'll get to that in due course. Let's talk about the Vinci Troy. From the outside,
what's your number 4? Did you hear that?
it was the Transition.
Okay.
Because I don't think where it, if in terms of recommending it, I'd be like, get this bike. You're going to spend half a day, overstroking it, doing this, that, and the other, and you're going to get something really cool. That'd be if it was a recommendation to someone that I liked, I would also spend that time.
Yeah.
So the Troy. I know I say it every time. It's called the wrong thing. There is the Sparta, and there's this, like the Spartan and the Troy, but it should be the Trojan. Do you know what I mean?
Like
Or it should
Trojan's
be
been
the-
taken by another brand for other things, so it's probably a little bit difficult to use.
Yeah, but then call the Da Vinci, call it the Sparta.
Isn't that their
One's-
long travel bike?
Yeah, but then that's the Spartan. And just the inconsistency is just so annoying.
Nice.
Wait, you want the condom brand to be called Sparta, and you want the
That's what I'm getting at. Thanks,
Ah,
Darian.
okay.
But anyway, do you understand what I mean?
I don't.
not
but-
at all.
Okay, so
Sorry.
Sparta, there's the Da Vinci Spartan,
Right,
which
the
is
long
people,
travel bike.
which is the people that live in Sparta,
Yes,
and then there is
the Troy,
The Troy,
which is the
city,
place where
not-
the Trojans
live.
live.
Yeah.
I see what
it's
you mean.
just like
It should be
because-
called the Trojan and the
Thank you.
Spartan.
or the Troy and the Sparta,
Right.
but
Oh,
not.
yeah.
Yeah, like ontolog. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah,
Someone probably has a name Sparta. Probably some sort of weird like energy
Well-
drink or something. They couldn't get it.
yeah. I mean, you're probably right, but come on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. All right.
So that fascinating tidbit aside, which was very Kaz, what you put this in 5th
Mhm.
behind the pump track bike.
Yes, but it's really close. I would say it's really 2 different people are going to want the different bikes. So it would depend which friend asked me which bike they should buy. Because somebody that wants the kind of the more aggressive trail bike, there's someone that might go to the bike park a little more often. That's actually kind of seeking out the more technical descents. I'm going to steer them towards the Troy because that's what it feels like. It kind of feels, it has that big bike feel. It feels slacker than it actually is. We measured it because it's like, this bike feels really slack, and the head angle is correct, 64 degrees, but it feels like a longer, bigger bike. So for that kind of person, yeah, the Troy is great. And I also like the made in Canada aspect of it. Aluminum frame, super easy to work on. So that's kind of
Made
the
in Canada
opposite
is
of
pretty
this one.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why then not higher?
I just really like how that spot rides a little bit more than the Troy. I think
Yeah,
that
but you
for
can
me,
put- You can put it even higher. It's, you could put
no,
them
there's
both
other
higher.
ones that are in those upper couple spots.
Yeah, but so what
Yeah.
are the drawbacks of this Troy?
I mean, I think the drawbacks, it's a bit, I don't know, there's not a ton of drawbacks. I think the ride feel itself, like, again, it just kind of depends on what that person's looking
Yeah,
for.
we're
So
getting
you
into
want
like the final.
yeah, like if you're looking for
little
the snappy,
subtleties now.
someone's like, I want a trail bike. Like I want to go long miles, lots of distance, something light and lively. That's not this bike. So that's
Yeah,
when,
but what I'm saying is, Kaz, why?
why, what? I'm
Why
confused.
isn't it that bike? What
Because
is it about
it's not
this
that
bike?
heavy and it's kind of slack and it sits deep in its suspension travel.
Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah. So,
Sweet.
so
So-
like that's what makes it good on the descents. It's like super soft off the top.
It
It kind
felt
of
to
rides
me
a little bit
biased
deep.
more towards the descents than the climbs to a degree that put me off of it a bit.
But
Like,
for
it
a
climbs
140 mil
well.
bike,
Yeah, it's like
What's
a
a
really
150 bike?
impressive.
is it 150?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's a very impressive 150 bike. I think it's just like
It's mixed wheels.
it feels like a little crusher. Like it's a good descending bike. And I think part like the wherever you're positioned on it, partially because of how it sits in its stroke, it feels, as you said, it feels slacker than it is. And I think that's pretty cool on like really steep, like maybe like more rock rolly, like featurey terrain. But in like what I think of as more trail bike typical stuff, it kind of had less of a exciting ride to
Yeah,
it.
it feels a little bit bigger too. Like the overall position's kind of like even just the seated climbing position kind of feel a little more stretched out. It's super manageable, but it doesn't have that liveliness that I would want from a trail bike. So
Yeah, very fair. Matt, how did you feel about the Troy?
I actually thought it was like very active and engaging. Like we talked about like the higher, deeper stance, the rider stance of like the Bronson. I felt like this was sort of a halfway house between this and some of the other shorter travel bikes. Like, yes, it's more geared towards descending, but it's also a little bit more nimble when going downhill than the Bronson, which you just kind of more not stand on and just let it go, but like that's where that bike shines. This one, the Troy, didn't handle those huge hits as well as the Bronson, but it was like more reactive, more nimble.
Yeah. And even, I would agree with that too. That's kind of what's fun about it. Like if you're on maybe a more flowy trail or like a jump trail, it does kind of spring off the trail more than you expect it to based on kind of how big it initially feels. But then there's some baked in liveliness. I really like that about it.
And they're sticking with the, this is a single pivot, linkage driven single pivot. In some ways, do you think single pivots are getting more refined and better, or do you think they're kind of maybe running out of steam in terms of where they sit within
it's a
the
little
industry?
tricky. There's only so much you can do. I think we ended up, filling with some volume spacers in this bike because it does have, we haven't seen the leverage ratio for this, but it does feel like it's probably a fairly high starting leverage ratio. You have to run a decent amount of air pressure in the shock, and you kind of do reach the bottom. When you want to push through the bike, you can kind of reach the end of the travel. It's not harsh, but it does feel like it wants to kind of go deeper. So there could be limitations to that design.
Yeah, you're eking 150 mils of travel out of a shorter shock too. So maybe there are some constraints there when they get into the, where the shock rests underneath the top too, but smaller sizes, they just want to use like a small shock all around. But yeah, we did have some setup differences between us and that shock. So.
Okay, so as we go on to our third place bikes, Kaz, what was number 3 for you?
Third place for me was the Specialized Stump Jumper.
We're back in agreement. Mine was also the Specialized. Dario?
Bronson.
Matt?
Stumpy.
We're getting closer.
Mad.
Yeah.
We started the same and then we kind of splayed off.
Yeah, the middle ones are the hard ones because they're so like...
For me, like my top 4, almost 5 were like, these are really good bikes.
Yeah, top 2, bottom 2.
Yeah, the bottom 2 kind of fall off a bit.
Yeah. Okay, so the Specialized, this is a bike that in some ways, to me, looking back at when we've had them in the past, it feels like a very easy bike to review. In other ways, it feels so, fair and even-handed. It's almost quite a hard bike to review because it's just like they've done it again. Yeah, it's another stump jumper. Everyone's going to like it.
It's very, very, very similar to the last one. I think that's part of it. It like the geometry is quite similar. The feel of it is quite similar, just kind of exacerbated a bit.
Yeah, it's the Stump Jumper Evo with a more plush suspension feel.
Yep.
Well, let's take a smaller sort of take a moment to talk about the suspension and more particularly the shock. Yes or no? No fence sitting. Does that Genie justify itself as film special?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I liked it. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. I would say it's 3-1 for me, but hey, that's okay. I think it's super cool. I think it does what probably they wanted it to do, and it's a really deep feeling. You get the very deep feeling of 145 mil. I would just like it to have a bit more compression damping.
Yeah, I did really like it. It was impressive, but it's not a bike that really suits me.
In what way?
I think I'm a little bit more dynamic in where I push into the ground.
Matt's
on the
too
bike.
good of a rider.
Jeez.
No, I get it. It's like you're like a press in rider, and I think we talked about this in the review. It values more of a like light touch. Perhaps.
Yeah, it really, it's right on that middle ground of a bike that is like provides comfort and control, but for someone looking for a bit more control out of the back end, I found that the geometry was influenced by how comfortable and quickly the shock moved at some times.
I mean, because it depends what setting you have it, and you'd have spaces to adjust it.
Yeah.
In some ways, it could be described as blending the best of a linear and a progressive platform. In other ways, you could say that it kind of combines some of the worst because it just means all you have is progression at the very end of the stroke.
I didn't feel the harshness at the bottom of the stroke though. Like we did some really steep, strange rock rolls, ones that just looked like they go straight down into a 90 degree. And I didn't have any it didn't feel like it was spitting me out, which was a good scenario.
So how would that be different than the Rocky then? Maybe you could explain that.
That's my argument. I would say that there is more mid-stroke, but the leverage ratio of the Specialized feels more like a hinge or a pivot, whereas the Rocky feels more like a wall.
Okay,
you know what I mean?
So you're hitting harder at the end.
You're hitting harder. But I would say if you could have a broken record at this point, I think if you had more compression damping to take you to that varying point where it becomes more progressive, I think it would be a vastly superior bike. Like the rear end, the shock performance.
Do you think it would take away from the top end feel of it?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it might. Who am I to say?
Right.
It must be rider weight too.
We'll find out.
Like you talk a lot about you prefer more compression than I do, but I'm also 20 pounds lighter than you. So like our base compression tunes or, kind of be like,
Might be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with rebound tunes.
Yes.
So, but there is no compression adjustment on it. And seems like that could be a nice little feature. Just a dial with
It would be
8
nice.
clicks of compression. Then that'd be
Yep.
kind of even wider range of riders could probably be really happy with it.
It feels strange to me to go so much down the rabbit hole of the spacer adjustment
Mm.
and then not include low speed compression, but doing so for the e-bike version.
Right. Yeah, that's what confused me because it to me felt like a very interesting and I think well executed proof of concept of this novel take on the air shock. I think it works very well with this bike. I figured, they'll just be adding this at some later date. That's okay. And then like not 2 months later, they came out with the e-bike one that has low speed compression. And I think, maybe that's going to be something we'll have available on the pedal bikes as well. But it feels like maybe a missing element. But I think the bike rides really well regardless.
I think it does. I mean, I still had it as my third bike. I think it is a very easy bike for most people to just get on and ride.
Yeah. And we are fixating on the shock, but like the bike as a whole is really impressive. Like it has a lot of adjustment. It's quite heavy, but it's a robust aluminum frame that I think will
It's $4,500, right?
It's a really good build.
By a margin, the
ones-
cheapest bike on test.
cheap, but there's none of the components immediately need to be swapped out. Like the brakes worked well, shifting was
Brakes are
fine. There's little quirks and quibbles, but for $4,500, it's a good solid bike, and for like a beginner to an advanced rider could have a good time.
Let's maybe just dabble into the geometry very quickly. It felt to me like it actually had a really just like sounds so stupid, but I said it before, easy to get on and ride, but it's still rewarding to ride when you want to push hard. It's got that nice thing of like it's quite a safe place to be. Want to get your weight on the front and really push.
It lets you, yeah.
Yeah, lets you. Cool. So now we're getting into the pointy end of things. Just to put everyone at ease, the Troy was actually my second. Once I got the shocks up, I was like, you know what? Easy, feels great. I really liked so much, but I thought it was comfortable and compliant, easy to turn. It felt, funnily enough, when we talk about the Santa Cruz, it just felt like one back from what the Santa Cruz was.
Yeah.
And a bit better at the trail riding, a bit, maybe its sort of remit was skewed slightly towards more just flatter, like not flat, but flatter trails. And that's why I thought it did such a great job in terms of recommending it.
Totally. It's also adaptable for rear wheel size, which is one thing the Bronson doesn't have. So if someone wants to do some experimentation, you can't really do that with a Bronson unless you decide to buy a high tower. So
I adjusted my bike. What do you do? I swapped out the whole frame.
Yeah. So I mean, for as far as recommending goes, I think I can see why you put it there. We talked about how close they are, but I could easily recommend a Troy to somebody. Don't get it. There's nothing.
It's worth noting we didn't mention, like with the Stumpy, you can run it as a mullet bike as well. You just have to get a different link. So a lot of these other bikes have a nice baked in flip chip that allows you to change wheel size without having to buy anything else. But you do have to buy a different link for this bike. And then the smaller 2 sizes, I think, come that way, which is the case with a couple of the others.
Very nice. Cool. Kaz, your second place bike in the silver position.
That's where the Santa Cruz Bronson goes.
Okay. Oh my God. Kaz.
I know. I feel like we'll see. I'll keep going through, but I have an idea of what's going to happen.
I think we might be there. That's pretty cool.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
This is the most professional thing we've ever done. Dario, number 2.
Stump jumper.
That's fine because it's still, oh my God. I've been playing a lot of solitaire recently.
Yeah, you're seeing, you're putting a couple steps again.
Matt.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
Number 2?
Yeah.
Bronson.
Fuck yeah, Matt. Woo!
Yeah.
Oh, editorial clarity never felt so good.
I liked the Bronson a lot. I think I came in expecting quite a bit of it, and it was a very good bike. It didn't like blow the rest out of the water, and I kind of thought it might. I was like, oh, this is a big bike positioned to be this like harder charging trail bike, and it feels that way. It didn't perform so much better than the Stumpy and my top choice bike. So to convince me that it was like the end all be all.
Last year, for instance, we had the Cromag on the Enduro bike field test, and that had 158 milliton. Previously as well, we've had some we've had the WeR1 in the Enduro field test before. I really like the Stumpy, but sorry to just keep going on. If it was in that test, it'd be a different conversation for me. You know what I mean? It just felt like that sort of more enduro flavored bike. But it is a very, very good bike. Kaz, you really liked it.
The Bronson or the Stumpy?
Bronson, sorry.
Oh yeah, Bronson. Yeah.
Can you talk us through?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it could have been 1 or 2, but I think we're going to talk about price a little bit. And so I think for like someone that's looking for a bike and value, We haven't said the first place one, but the first place one is a really good value. This bike is fairly expensive, but I do like everything about it. Like it's got the in-frame storage, the geometry works super well for me. I don't actually wish, but it is limited when it comes to adjustability as far as frame dimensions. Like it has a flip chip, but it does 3 millimeters of bottom bracket height.
We've spoke about this before. Like I have gone on record as saying how nonsense flip chips are, because they used to take your bike from a 67 degree head angle that you hated to the 66.5 degree that everyone used. And it was pointless because why go from the bad place to the just okay place?
Yeah.
But now we've got a place where 63, 64, 65 are all good options, and it lets you tweak, which is actually what it should be there for to me. It should be about two usable things in range.
I almost wish the Santa Cruz didn't have a flip chip.
Yeah, I wouldn't care if it had
It's just that much harder to remove the shock.
That much harder to remove the
It's a tiny,
shock.
but like I don't want the high mode.
I mean, for me, I wish they had figured out a way just to do 2 different wheel sizes, incorporated that.
That would be
just
cool.
for
They've
versatility.
got a different bike.
I know, exactly. Yeah, I'm testing that one at the same time too. So
You and a friend can buy a high tower and a Bronson,
we
and you
just
can swap
days.
chain stays.
I come Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you can get
And is that the difference? It's the chainstay. Is it the same front
It's the
triangle?
rear
same front
triangle.
triangle.
Yeah.
Different swing arm.
And what would you have? The high tower or the Bronson?
At this moment, I prefer the Bronson. I only have like 4 rides in on the high tower, but I think that the Bronson has that kind of like goof off nature. I like the smaller wheel, especially in the steeps, and I really like steep trails. So I think that I prefer mixed wheel for those kind of bikes. So that's where the Bronson shines. And same around here, we rode some really steep stuff and kind of on the rowdy things that I like to ride, but then it also is a good pedaler. We rode some really janky, strange trails, and it worked great in that. So so that's where the Bronson, number 2.
Excellent. Matt, I'm so happy how this is coming together.
Yeah.
Matt, Bronson's also your
Yes.
number 2.
Yeah.
So close, but not quite there.
Yeah. Number 2, I mean, yeah, it is expensive. It's only available in carbon, but you get a lifetime warranty. You get lifetime supply of bearings. Those bikes hold their value. People know the name. They're just recognizable and known for producing long-lasting bikes. And so if you buy that, you're already starting with a really good package, and it's just going to be supported throughout the whole time you have it.
And it comes with good parts. I think like worth noting, it's the only bike we had on test that comes with Mavens, which are like significantly stronger brakes than a lot of the other stuff we had. The wheel set is fine, not amazing, but it's good fork, good shock. I think it's a good package, and
It's so good that it's like
you could keep it for a really long time and just like trade parts out. And that's what I tend to recommend friends, is like a bike that I know they'll have for a long time and be able to iterate on.
And if you pay even more money, you can lose the ability to run a cable actuated drivetrain.
That's true.
I mean, finally.
But freedom from choice, you know, what's it worth?
I mean,
Mike?
same with a stump jumper. If you go carbon, then you can't run a cable actuated drivetrain. So it's great. Just like,
True.
Yeah. And that's,
What does a drill bit cost? $5, $10?
yeah.
or electrical tape.
Yeah.
Oh man, let me tell you.
So now I'm so excited.
I know, we need like
typing it
this
in.
is like when you get solitaire and all like does the
Pretty
cool
cool.
Yeah, it's
thing.
happening.
Yeah.
So the top bike,
For all 4 of
presumably,
us.
unless there's a bike that I haven't tested that's been hiding in a cupboard.
Yeah.
You probably forgot one.
It's Stefan's old,
is the Canyon Spectral.
Yeah.
I feel the Spectral has sort of been all over the place. We've seen it. There's been like a coil sprung mixed wheeled version. There's been the 150, 160 version. Most
They have
people are familiar with.
way too many bikes called the
There's
same thing.
the Spectral 125. And now there's this Kaz. What a bloody bike.
This is the one. It's the one they've been aiming for. You know, like you said, they made different ones. They made the short travel thing. They made the longer travel.
It's the Goldilocks one.
Yeah, and they just mixed it all up. And then it's like, this is it. This is a full, you know, and this is you can run it as a mixed wheel, but this is dual 29-inch, but it feels like a mixed wheel
you would
bike
be fooled
in all the good ways.
That,
Yeah.
It is great. I remember I did that shootout and I just was like,
Yeah, this works great.
Yep.
I remember saying to Stefan, the filmer, because like I'd only ridden, I think 2 of the bikes by that point. And so we set into 30% sag and the adjustments in the middle. And I just went to Stefan like, sometimes in the past, Canyons have been a bit like, oh God.
Yeah.
And this feels like, you know, like it feels, it felt just right.
Great. Yeah. One from the shorter travel, it's the 140 bike, but it's kind of like, if you wanted that trail bike, and that's what makes it easy to recommend. You know, someone's like, I want a trail bike to do everything. Here you go. You can ride it in the bike park. You can be really happy on the more pump tracky kind of flowy trails.
It's got a steering spring.
You could have
element.
springs.
You can remove so
you can
easily.
take it very easily out, and then you just have an extra spring for parts of. We could make a wind chime. It'd be a good wind chime.
It'd be a wind chime.
Yeah, like a small slingshot.
It looks like it's, do you know what I mean? But like, It's called them washing lines out here as well.
Oh yeah,
It looks like part of like a 70s washing line.
Oh yeah.
like some kind of exercise band where you like pull it and see how strong you are.
Yeah. When I rode that bike, I thought 2 words: Matt Beer. I thought this is a Matt Beer bike.
Why is that?
I think because you're like you're not very like showy. You're not like they're like this, that, and the other. But you turn up and then you just ruin people's evening. And this is the bike. We can go riding. I can have my pick of downhill bikes, and we can give you the Spectral, and you can just see me driving back to Squamish crying. I think it's that sort of bike. Do you know what I mean? It's got that.
It can definitely hang. Yeah, on the downhills, it's not as comfortable as the Stumpy. No. That was one huge differentiation, but it's not like clacky either. Like, decent small bump. I just thought this thing had it all. Like good balance, front to rear, the options with the flip chip and the change in the rear wheel size. It's clean looking. It has the storage box. It has a water bottle mount inside the frame. Just
small one, but it still has one.
And good value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dario, talk us through it.
So I was torn between this and the Stump Jumper as my top choice, and the Bronson. Honestly, like all 3 very, very different bikes. Like the 3 couldn't be more different from each other in a way. I think the Bronson and the Spectral both offer really good damping that keeps you controlled through travel, and I think that allows them to push a little bit beyond their numbers. And both have good geometry. Same with the Stump Jumper, but the Stump Jumper is using kind of like a activity to keep you glued to the ground. And as Matt said, I think it's a bit more comfortable for that, where the Spectral has some feedback, but I didn't mind it. You can just hit things hard and you feel it, but it's not putting you offline. It's not like, breaking your ankles like I think some of the other bikes were wanting to do. It punches exactly as it should. It doesn't feel like a pig on the climbs. It did all the things I want a trail bike to do really nicely.
It felt that it used the right amount of travel for the impact. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like it felt like it was just
meters it out. Like Matt and I went on a pretty long pedal day. I took that. He took the Stump Jumper.
Yeah.
And pedaled really nicely. We hit some free ride trails at the end, and I used absolutely every millimeter of travel, and I was aware of that, but it was where I expected to.
Yes.
You're like, oh, that made sense.
Well, there's nothing, you should bottom out sometimes when it's warranted. And I thought it was an amazing bike. Bless you. Before we got into this test, we said we'd save it for the podcast. I mean, heavy billing, it might be a bit of a damp squib now. I said that I thought this selection of bikes there were a couple of like good, I mean, the Spectral was arguably a standout, but largely how they actually rode, I was quite underwhelmed. And I want to say my 2 reasons for that.
Yeah.
The Forbidden Druid and the Giant Trance were 2 bikes that blew my mind at the start of the year reviewing them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if they were here, they'd be mixing it and going blow for blow with the Spectral.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be those 3 that would be a jump ahead. And I just found the Spectral I thought was like a real standout bike. The rest, honestly, I thought were a bit tepid.
Do we all have a bike that we would insert here?
Yeah, why not?
In competition? I think it would be kind of interesting here. You just brought a few other bikes from your past year in, like out of the past year of trail bikes we reviewed, because that tends to be what we spend the most time on. What one bike would you insert into the field test?
I might have 2, but I think that...
2 is fine.
Yeah, the Score 2030, it has less travel than everything here. It's just kind of out of the travel bracket, but I'm still a huge fan of that bike. That's the 120 rear, 140 front. You could make it 130, but I've ridden it here before, and it has that kind of like liveliness, that some of the elements of the spot that I liked are in that bike. And another like slack, I don't even know, but it's just a cool bike. So that one.
And would it be in the sharp end of things?
No, I think the suspension feel is a lot like the Canyon Spectral, where it's really like really measured how it delivers it, but then you can ride some rowdier stuff and not hit the bottom. So I think that was a cool bike. And then also the Trek Fuel EX.
Yeah.
That's a kind of your bread and butter bike, 140 rear. You can make it mixed wheel. It's super versatile. I rode that a ton last year, and I think that would slot in the top 4.
Didn't we have that in the field test?
We did, and that would still be relevant. Like it's one of those ones, like bikes, they come out all the time, and people think that we're trying to tell them to buy new bikes.
No, that's
so it's like there's still bikes from 3 years ago. I think it's 3 years old now, right? And I lose track of the dates, but like that one's still relevant. And I think that's one thing we're seeing with the geometry adjustments of these bikes. They don't get out of date as quick. You can just put slacker if all of a sudden slacker,
especially when they're so adjustable.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'd put those 2. They'd fit in this crop of bikes.
Interesting to hear neither of you talk about the optic.
Well, the old optic.
The old, exactly.
Yeah, the new optic is cool, but I think it's more of a niche bike, like because they made it have the high pivot. It's interesting, but I think that's a bike that's your person you'd recommend it to has a little even narrower. It's like someone that wants the downhill bike performance in a trail bike. And
I'd sooner put things. Like an O chain on the Canyon or something like that. It's kind of just a weird. I don't know if adding a high pivot to a trail bike makes sense to me. Yeah, that's all.
With that. The Druid,
you do have the Druid, but
the Druid is amazing, but
that has a little bit more travel. Like the optic's 125 now, I think. Is that right?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Well, even with the Druid, it was just it would be a cat amongst the pigeons here, but it's a strange.
But I thought you were the guy that didn't want the downhill performance out of your trail bike.
I know, but that just feels so.
But it's just so good.
It works on flat too. Is surprising.
So is the Bronson.
Yeah.
Well, let's not get into that.
Matt, what's your one or two bikes to add in here?
I mean, I don't want to like steal your thunder, but I would also say the Druid because it did really get on with that bike.
No, I'd like to ride it. I haven't ridden it. I like the previous one. I haven't gotten a chance to ride it. I'd probably have it in there too.
Yeah, so that'd be on the shorter end, and then on the slightly longer end would be the VR1 Arrival 152. That was
okay. Yeah, just 2 millimeters outside of our.
Didn't make the cut. Yeah. Too much.
Yeah.
Too much bike, over biking.
Does that feel more trail bikey to you than it does enduro bikey?
It's kind of one of those bikes that can feel, well, more geared towards downhill when you point it that way, but still comes alive on the flatter terrain.
Cool.
And yeah, it's because
you run pretty low sag on that bike, right? It's like meant to be more of a like firm feel, but it gets out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I think...
Did Dario say his?
I didn't, but Henry doesn't want me to.
Yes.
No,
it's the question. I got confused. What was it?
Mine would be the Smuggler and the 5010.
What about the Jeff C?
I like the Jeff C a lot. That's a good point.
Yeah,
Damn it.
I kind of forgot about the Jeff C. That's a cool bike too.
It's not about...
No, it's still the Smuggler and the 5010.
Okay.
Those bikes were like... They stood out in my head for a reason, I think. The 5010 is like such a nice handling bike. And I think that's maybe why the Bronson wasn't as high on my list. Is because the 5010 still... Like I've ridden it recently too. It's not one of those like, oh, back when I rode the 5010, it was beautiful. Like I rode it a couple months ago and it was really fun. And it's more of what I want out of a trail bike. And then same with the Smuggler and the Sentinel. I think the Smuggler is just more to my tastes. Like feels active. It's got a lot of grip. It handles a little bit sharper, but in a way feels more confident because of that. Because you can like cut turns and feel a bit more in control.
Because what was the Santa Cruz you had that you made look absolutely awful?
That's a tall boy.
That was a tall boy. Yeah.
I still have it, and it looks great. Thank you very much.
Well, that rounds up. We need to go home.
We've been here for 12 years.
I need to go sleep in my bed.
Goodness me. Thank you very much for watching, if indeed anyone still is, and for following all the content on this year's field test. Now, we have had so much content out from this one. It feels like it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it all, and don't forget to get in the comments and talk us through what would be your pick of the bunch, and if you had a chance to ride any of these amazing bikes yet. Thanks, guys, and we'll catch you next time.